Agnes Demo, and today we shall be looking at verb forms. But before we start our lesson, let's take a look at our lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define verb forms, list out the basic verb forms in English language, state the verb forms for action verbs and auxiliary verbs, explain verb forms in relation to person, number, tense, and voice, and make sentences with different verb forms. Now let's go to our lesson. In grammar, we define verbs as words that signify actions or words that refer to actions. Words that tell you what somebody or something is doing at any particular point in time. Now, these verbs have different ways they can be spoken or written in English grammar. And the various ways a verb can be written or spoken are known as verb forms, and that's what we are studying today. And so we said verb forms are the ways a verb can be written or spoken, especially as it relates to tense, person, number, and voice. Tense forms are the various ways verbs can be written, spoken, in relation to tense, person, number, and voice. Now, in English language, we have 5 basic verb forms, and they include 1, the base form, 2, the simple present tense form, 3, the present tense form also, but with the special ending ing, 4, the past tense form, and 5, the past participle form. Now, take a look at these examples here. The first one is a simple or base form. For example, the verb eat. Secondly, the present tense form or the S form, eats. That's the form with the S. Thirdly, the present participle or the ing form, eating. And the past tense form, ate. And lastly, the past participle form, eating. So these are the 5 basic verb forms in English language. Now here are some examples of verbs and their verb forms. Some examples of verbs in these 5 verb forms that I have listed out. The first one here is the verb sing. This is the base form. Sings, singing, sang, and song. Teach, teaches, teaching, taught, and taught. For the verb teach, you find that the past tense form and the past participle form are the same. That's why we have taught and taught here. And then the verb fall, base form, S form, ing form, past tense form, and past participle form. Same thing for instruct, base form, S form, ing form, past tense form, and past participle form. Now let's look at verb forms for various types of verbs. We are going to start with looking at the action or the main verbs. In our previous lesson, remember that we defined action verbs as verbs that indicate an action, a physical action, something you can see with your eyes. For example, playing, you can see someone playing, you can see someone driving, teaching. Right now I'm teaching you, so you can see me teaching. So those verbs that indicate a physical action, something you can see with your eyes, are known as action verbs. And now we are going to look at how action verbs follow through with their verb forms. Action verbs are categorized into 2. They are either regular or irregular verbs. And remember that in our previous lessons we said regular verbs are verbs that take ed or d at the end of it to mark past tense or past participle, while irregular verbs are the verbs that do not take ed or d or t at the end of it to mark past tense or past participle. Rather, irregular verbs change their forms or change their spellings in their past tense form or past participle form. Now, here we said regular verbs have 4 verb forms. They are the base form, the present tense or S form, the present participle or ing form, and the past tense form. Now, why did I say they have 4 verb forms? I said so because regular verbs have the same past tense form and the same past participle form. The past tense form and the past participle form of a regular verb is almost always the same. Now, let's take these verbs here, for example. We have the verb clap. In its S form, it is claps. In ing form, it's clapping. And in its past tense, it's clapped, as well as in its past participle. I have clapped my hands. That's past participle. So it has 4 verb forms. The same goes for the verb jump. S form, it's seen as jumps, jumping in the ing form, and jumped in its past tense form, as well as its past participle form. So most regular verbs that take ed, d, or t at the end of it have just 4 verb forms. They can appear in 4 ways when you speak or when you write. Now, talking about irregular verbs, most irregular verbs remain the same as their base form, past tense form, and past participle. The verbs in these 3 forms are the same. Now, in such a case or in such a situation, we can say that such verbs have just 3 forms. Because if it's the same in past tense, past participle, and base form, that is 1 form. And then the S form makes it another form, and the ing form makes it the 3rd form. While some other verbs can decide to change their spellings, and that's what we've stated here. Now, look at the verb cut. In its base form, it is cut. In its past tense form, it is cut. And in its past participle, it is still cut. In its S form, it's cut. And then in its ing form, it is cutting. The same thing with the verb put. The same in base form, past tense, and past participle. S form, it is puts. And ing form, it is putting. So we can see that these kinds of irregular verbs have just 3 forms, because the base form is the same as the past tense form, and it's also the same as the past participle. So we are only left with the S form and the ing form, making it 3 forms. Now, most other irregular verbs change their spellings or form in the past tense or past participle. Now, this kind of verbs can have 4 or 5 verb forms depending on the verb. We are saying that most irregular verbs change their spellings or change their forms. And most of those verbs also can decide to change the spellings or forms through the 5 verb forms, while some others remain the same in the past tense and in the past participle. So we can have verbs with 4 verb forms or verbs with 5 verb forms. Now let's take a look at these examples here. We have the verb sleep. In its base form, it is sleep. Present tense form, sleeps. Ing form, sleeping. Past tense form, slept. And past participle form, slept. So the verb sleep has just 4 forms because it is the same here. So we just have sleep, sleeps, sleeping, and slept, making it 4 verb forms. While the verb eat has 5. Base form, eat. Present tense form, eats. Ing form, eating. Past tense form, ate. And past participle form, eating. So the verb eat has 5 verb forms. So we've said that most irregular verbs also can be 4 or can have 4 verb forms, while some others can change in 5 places hence making it 5 verb forms. Now, the second category of verbs we'll be looking at, and their verb forms, is auxiliary verbs. And we'll start with looking at primary auxiliary verbs. Remember that in our previous lessons we said auxiliary verbs are verbs that help main verbs. They are called helping verbs because they help main verbs to make actual meaning. Now, primary auxiliary verbs include all the forms of the be verbs, that is, am, are, were, was, been, and being. Auxiliary verbs also include have, the have verbs, which has its forms as have, had, and has. And then the last primary auxiliary verb we talked about is the verb do, or the do verbs, which has its forms as do, does, did, done, and doing. These are primary auxiliary verbs. We have the be verbs, the have verbs, and the do verbs. Now, be and do verbs have 5 verb forms, while have verbs have just 4 verb forms. Now, let's look at this table here. The verb be has its base form as be, present tense form as either are, is, or am, ing form as being, past tense form as was or were, and past participle form as been, which makes it 5 verb forms. And then the do verbs has its base form as do, present tense form as does, ing form doing, past tense form did, and past participle form done, which makes it also 5 verb forms. And lastly, have is the base form of the have verbs. Present tense form is has, ing form having, past tense form had, and past participle form of the verb have is also had, which makes it 4 verb forms. Have, has, having, and had. So primary auxiliary verbs have different numbers of verb forms also. The be verbs and the do verbs have 5 verb forms, while the have verbs have just 4 verb forms. Now, we've looked at primary auxiliary verbs. The other type of auxiliary verbs are known as the modal auxiliary verbs. And we did say in our previous lessons that these are verbs that are used to express states or conditions which are understood by the writer or speaker. They are used to express possibility, probability, ability, obligation. They are also used to make a request, suggestion, or offer. Now, unlike primary auxiliary verbs, modal auxiliary verbs do not have special verb forms. They have just one verb form, and that is the base form, just the way they appear in the dictionary, just the way they appear as words. They do not have any special endings like ing or s or ed. They don't have those special endings. They just have one verb form, which is the base form. And so they appear as they are, like should, would, can, must, will, could, shall, may, and might. So modal auxiliary verbs do not have verb forms. They have just one verb form, which is the base form of the verb. Now, in English grammar, verbs must agree in relation to person, number, tense, and voice. When making sentences, your voice must agree with these factors or these things I have mentioned. You must agree with the person, must agree with the number, that is how many persons you're referring to in your sentence. It must also agree with the tense, and it must also agree with the voice, which has to do with either passive or active voice. But now let's look at how a verb should agree in or with the person you are referring to in your sentence. Verbs must agree with the person of the subject. That's what we mean when we say person. The subject of the sentence, that is the person performing the action in the sentence. There are three persons that function as the subject of sentences. We have the first person, the second person, and the third person. These three persons exist in our day-to-day writing. And then we have the first person singular and plural, the second person singular and plural, the third person singular and plural. So basically we have three persons: first person, second person, and third person. But these three persons are broken down further into singular or plural. Now the first person refers to the speaker or writer. In every sentence, there's always someone who is making the sentence or who is saying something. That person refers to the first person, and it can either be singular or plural. In English, the first person is represented with the pronouns I in the singular form and we as the plural. For example, using the be verb, we have sentences like I am exhausted. We are exhausted. Now notice that the first sentence here makes use of the first person singular pronoun I. And the be verb which is used after I should be am in the present tense. I am exhausted. We cannot say I are exhausted. The verb are will not agree with the person I, with the first person singular pronoun I. So we have to choose a verb that agrees in person with the pronoun, which is am. So it has to be I am. And then the next one here says we are exhausted. It would be wrong to say we am exhausted because am is not suitable for the person, the first person plural pronoun we. It will only be suitable for the first person singular pronoun, which is I. So our verbs must of necessity agree with the person or the subject which we are referring to in our sentence. Now that's for the first person. Secondly, the second person pronoun or the second person in English language refers to the reader or the listener. That is the person reading what the speaker has said or the person listening to what the speaker has said. And it is represented with the pronoun you. You, in this sense, can either be singular or plural. For example, you are exhausted, referring to just one person. Then we can also say, you all are exhausted. You here doesn't refer to one person, it refers to a group of people or a number of people. So the second person pronoun also, or subjects using the second person, must also agree with the verb and vice versa. The verb should agree with the second person also. You don't use a verb meant for the first person, singular or plural, for the second person. So that's basically what we are trying to say. A third person refers to a subject that is neither the writer nor the reader, a third party. We did say that the first person is the speaker or the writer. The second person is the listener or the reader. Now the third person is not the reader, he's also not the speaker. He's not the writer, and he's also not the listener. He's just a third party, someone that is not the reader or the listener. It is represented with the pronouns he, she, or it for the singular, or they for plural. For example, he or she or it is exhausted. They are exhausted. It would be a wrong thing to say, he are exhausted. That would be wrong. The verb are should agree with the subject or with the person that you are referring to in number also. And secondly, here we are saying they are exhausted. It would be wrong to say they is exhausted because is a singular verb meant for a singular subject, but they refers to a group of people. So we can't mix it up. We cannot use a singular verb for a plural subject. And we cannot also use a singular verb for a plural subject. Now also, apart from agreeing with person, verbs should also agree in number. Number refers to how many people you are talking about. How many people are represented by the subject in a sentence. How many people are you talking about? How many people performed an action? Verbs must agree with the number of the subject. Singular verbs, now take note of this, singular verbs are verb forms with the suffix es or s, while plural verbs are the forms without any special ending or suffix. A lot of students mix this up a lot. Apart from having nouns with s, we all know that nouns, normally, if you want a noun to be plural, you add an s or es as the case may be. And then most people apply the same rule for verbs, but it does not apply. For verbs, when you have an s or an es, it means that verb is singular, not plural. But when you have a verb without s or without es at the end, it means that verb is plural. So it's just like the opposite of nouns. When you have nouns with s, it means the noun is plural. But when you have verbs with s, it means the verb is singular, not plural. So it's just like opposites. Now, singular verbs take on singular subjects, while plural verbs take plural subjects. Singular verbs, singular subjects, plural subjects. For example, the man jumps over the fence. Here we find that we have a singular subject, the man. And our verb here, jumps, is also a singular verb. Remember I said when you have an s after a verb, it means the verb is singular, not plural. Secondly, each child needs a guardian. Each child here refers to one child each, or one child at a time. So it represents a singular subject. And our verb here, needs, is also a singular verb. Thirdly, neither Tammy nor Wari sings well. Now, when you find two subjects using neither nor, it makes the subject singular. A lot of people get confused and they feel because you mention two people's names or because there are two people represented there, therefore it is plural. But once you find neither or nor in a sentence where you have two people or you're referring to two people, it means that subject is singular. So don't get confused and think it is plural. So, neither Tammy nor Wari sings well. It also agrees with the verb sings, which is a singular verb. The students sweep their classroom daily. Now, notice here that the students refers to a group of people, which makes it plural. So the subject here is plural, and the verb sweep is also plural. Remember I said when you have a verb without an s or es, it means the verb is a plural verb. Next, Mabel and Buchi dance better than their siblings. Here we have two subjects, Mabel and Buchi, which makes it plural, and the plural verb dance. And lastly, the staff of St. Forest do their jobs efficiently. The staff of St. Forest refers to or represents a group of people, which makes it a plural subject. And the verb do is also a plural verb. So from these sentences, you can see that the subjects agree in number with the verbs. So that's how we should make our sentences and not mix them up. Singular subject, plural verb, plural subject, singular verb. That won't be right grammatically. So we should try as much as possible to make sure we have singular verbs and singular subjects, plural verbs and plural subjects, as the case may be. Now let's look at how verb forms should agree with tense. Remember I said tense refers to the time an action takes place. Every action takes place at a particular point in time. Some actions are taking place now, that is presently. Some actions took place yesterday, that is past tense. And some actions will take place tomorrow or next week or in years to come, that is future tense. So we have three basic tenses in English language: the present tense, the past tense, and the future tense. So like person and number, verb forms should also agree with the tense of the verb. Now let's look at these examples here. We have sentences here in the present tense. She sings every day, and the verb here in present tense is the verb sings. In past tense, yesterday she sang. Now notice the verb sings has changed to sang because of its tense. Tomorrow she will sing. This is future tense. With the auxiliary verb will, we have indicated that this action will take place sometime in the future. Same thing here. Tombra plays every day. Plays here is the present tense form of the verb play. He played yesterday. Played is the past tense form of the verb play. He will play tomorrow. Will play is the future tense of the verb play. Now notice that the verbs change when the tenses change. It would be wrong to say yesterday she sings, because sings, the verb sings with an S, can only be used in the present tense. You cannot use sings for a past tense action or when you're referring to something that happened in the past. You cannot also say yesterday she will sing, because yesterday is in the past. So verbs have to change as the tense forms change, and the verb forms should agree with the tense which a speaker or a writer refers to. Another aspect that verb forms should agree is with voice. Now in English grammar we have two voices. First, the active voice. Second, the passive voice. Now, voice shows the relationship between the subject and object of a verb. That's what voice does. It shows you the relationship between a subject and the object of a verb. There are two kinds of voices, like I've said before: the active voice and the passive voice. Most verbs take different forms in the active voice and the passive voice. Now let's look at the examples on this table. In active voice, we have a sentence like, Madam Tarela gives out instructions. In passive voice, that sentence would be, instructions are given out by Madam Tarela. Instructions are given out by Madam Tarela. Now, notice that the verb gives here in active voice, which is the simple present tense of the verb give. Notice it changed here to past participle in the passive voice. Same thing with the second sentence. Auntie Irene edits my scripts. In passive voice, it would be, my scripts are edited by Auntie Irene. The verb edits here also changed to past tense in the passive voice. So verbs change like that. As a voice changes, when you change sentences from active voice to passive voice, you notice a change in the verb. The same thing goes when you're changing sentences from passive voice to active voice. The verbs change. So we also must take that into consideration, that the verb forms should agree with the particular voice you're writing in, either passive voice or active voice. Now here is a list of verbs and their verb forms for us to look at your study time, at your leisure. You can study this table and know these various verb forms. Here we have 5 columns. The first one is base form, and these are all verbs in their base form. The second column here is present tense form or S form, and these are all verbs in their present tense forms. Third column is the ing form, and these are verbs in the ing form. We also have the verbs in their past tense. These are verbs in their past tense. And lastly, we have verbs in their past participle, and these are verbs in their past participle. So if you study this table, I'm sure that you would know the various forms of these verbs, and possibly other verbs too, which you might want to find their verb forms out. We've come to the end of our lesson on verb forms today, but before we round this lesson off, let's take a look at our summary. Today we learned that verb forms are the ways a verb can be written as it relates to tense, person, number, and voice. We also learned that there are 5 basic verb forms in English grammar: the base form, the present tense form or S form, the ing form, the past tense form, and lastly, the past participle form. We learned also that most verbs have 3 forms, some other verbs have 4 forms, and most other verbs have 5 forms. And lastly, we learned that some verbs change their forms in relation to person, number, tense, and voice. Now let's go to our test section. Question 1. What is the base form of the be verb? A, is it is, B, am, or C, be? The correct answer is C, be. Remember we talked about the be verbs, primary auxiliary verbs, and they have their forms as is, am, were, was, been, and be, being. And the base form of the verb, of that be verb, is the verb be. So if you picked option C, you are correct. Our next question says, what is the past participle form of the verb come? Is it came, come, or coming? The correct answer is B, come. Come is the past participle form of the verb come. We've come to the very end of our lesson on verb forms today. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.